Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Byte clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Patrick Hamilton. Patrick is one half of the Kill by Kill podcast, and we hear he's the third youngest Eagle Scout in California history and can fashion a compass out of the tears of bears. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you.
Can you verify the validity of that statement?
Greetings and salutations. At the time I achieved the rank, I was the third youngest Eagle Scout. Okay. I don't know that I may have been surpassed many times over. I don't keep in contact with the Boy Scouts.
You don't?
No, the reason I became an Eagle Scout so quickly is that I saw all these kids like being told by their parents, like, you won't get a driver's license. You know, we're going to hold all these advancements in your life as a teenager over your head unless you achieve this mark. And I'm like, I don't want to wear this uniform in high school. I'm getting this over with. And that's what I did. I like, no girls talk to me. I'm 12 years old. What else do I have to do with my summer? And I just went through all of these merit badge things. And by the end of it, I'm like, I'm an Eagle Scout. I don't have to do Boy Scouts anymore. And then my dad sent me to Boy Scout Jamboree in Virginia, and the lightning struck 3 different people, and it rained the entire time.
Excuse me? Were you at Camp Crystal Lake?
Almost. It's one of these things where they do it on an Army base or an Air Force base. I can't remember which, but it's like it's a lot of open fields with some wooded areas. Luckily, we were in a wooded area, and the kids in the open fields, 3 of them got struck by lightning the year I went. And the Beach Boys played twice. They were supposed to be just the opener, but they ended up being the closer because the closer didn't show up and they were still around. I don't know. I spent the entire time in my tent reading a Stephen King novel.
Hell yeah.
That whole story sounds fake, and I love it.
And yet, it's true.
Phenomenal.
My parents bought me a camera so that I could take pictures while I was on this trip. They all came back blurry. And the reason why is we were never allowed to stop to take pictures. We were just on a forced death march throughout this whole thing. So I had to take pictures as I walked.
You didn't get any sick, nasty pictures of the Beach Boys?
No.
Damn it.
I did not. No. I did not care for them at the time, nor did I care for them after. I can't. No, I'm not a Beach Boys fan.
Wait, that's also hilarious that they were playing at a Boy Scout
Jamboree?
Jamboree.
Yeah.
Huh. It's a lot to think about. Lots to digest. Lots to ponder.
Mike Love has gambling debts that he needs to pay off. I don't know what it is, but they're out there. They're grinding.
I guess to change gears a little bit from the Beach
But
Boys.
I wasn't brought on here to talk about how the Beach Boys scared the hell out of me as a child.
That would be hilarious if someone did, but... So, Patrick, how did you get into horror films? Or horror in general?
Well, it really comes down to me being an intensely scared child. Like, I was frightened by absolutely everything in life. I grew up Mormon, and in California, I was always told about, the pioneers coming across the prairie. And there were all these horrible stories of people like dying of dysentery. And it just really scared the living hell out of me that God was so interested in what I was doing. He was always involved. And it just blossomed from there, this constant eyes over my shoulder. And then my imagination was so overactive that things that seem, very benign, like the theme to the Pink Panther cartoon and movies, the Henry Mancini, it's a very jazzy tune. Da-dun,
Yeah.
da-dun, 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 scared the hell out of me. It's meant to evoke someone sneaking into your house, and because he's a jewel thief. And
That's
that is true.
I didn't know anything about the actual movies or anything like that. Just that jazzy little tune just made me think, someone's coming to get me. Someone's coming to get me right now. There he is.
So, you said you grew up Mormon, but were you were you allowed to watch horror movies in your household, or did it come to you later, a little bit later in life?
It all came to me later. Everything was verboten. I had to get special permission to watch the 1976 remake of King Kong on television. There was no access for me to horror movies of any kind, and I felt like I needed to find a way to examine what was scaring me. And luckily for me, my library at school had the answer. And it was this little series of books from Crestwood House called the Monster Series.
Oh, yeah.
And they had Frankenstein, Creature of the Black Lagoon, these little black and white with orange covers on them.
Yes.
And I could read about all of these older horror films and sort of demystify the process. Like, all right, I'm scared to death of the Wolfman. But if I understand the Wolfman and what he is as a character, all right, now I've demystified it a little bit. I'm not as panic-stricken about the idea of lycanthropes running into my house in Glendale, California. So that for me was the beginning of like, all right, I need to seek out information to sort of let the air out of this balloon. And then at one point, my Nana said, I'm not buying you toys anymore. Just a decree. There's too many kids in your family. You're the oldest. I'm cutting you off.
Oh, no.
It was fine. She was right. And she said, but listen, I would spend every Saturday with her, and I would carry her groceries and take her around town. I was like a caddy for her. And she said, I'll buy you anything you want to read, though. And so that became an open invitation to buying X-Men comics and buying Mad Magazine compilations.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And one afternoon at the Gelsons, I asked her to buy me a Fangoria magazine.
Ooh.
And so she did. She's like, it's on the bottom shelf at the grocery store. Like, it can't be that bad. I wasn't allowed to take them home, but I could read them at Nana's house. And that gave me all this information of like, oh, this person looks like their throat is slit, but it's this whole process of building makeup on top of their throat and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So that to me was like, oh, I want to be a horror makeup person. No, I don't have that kind of skill. My hands don't do that. But from that, it was that thing of like, if I learn more about this, I won't be so scared in the world. And that's where it was really born.
That's so cool, though.
Yeah.
I probably was a real pill to my parents. My imagination constantly ran away with me. Like I was scared to death of what was going on inside of Pirates of the Caribbean or inside various dark rides at theme parks. Like my mind would just run away with me at the drop of a hat. But if I knew a little bit more about it, I could overcome it. And so, but my parents were in no way, shape, or form approving of my enjoyment of horror or horror-related products.
Do you remember what the first horror movie was that you saw?
The memory that comes to me is the TV movie from 1972, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Okay.
It played in the afternoon every, I'm old. The afternoon movie would play on ABC, and every summer they would have like a horror thriller week, right? So Trilogy of Chair would show up and stuff like that. And they played this thing and we happened to be, our one vacation of the year on Balboa Island in Newport Beach. And in broad daylight, this TV movie goes off, and the ending of that movie sent me into catatonic fear.
Really?
They remade it.
Yes,
with Katie Holmes.
Katie
It's
Holmes.
not
That's, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to remember where I knew that name from besides the original.
Guillermo del Toro loves that movie as well.
He does.
Put us in the same category. Obviously, everything is equatable. I'm a genius on that level. Blah, 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 blah. But the ending of that movie just haunted me. Like, I have a Blu-ray copy. I've not put it in my player yet because I don't want to break the magic spell.
Yeah.
But I want to own it. So.
That's so. And how old were you? Do you remember how old you were?
I was probably 6 or 7 at that point.
So you still got to experience kinder trauma via horror movies, even though you weren't really allowed to watch horror movies.
But I don't know that. I mean, that's a made-for-TV movie. Like, it's a lot of ambiance,
True.
And I think an adult watching that would kind of scoff on it. But it hit me at that right point. And then everything past that was like things that I would catch on the side, like Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, originated here in LA, and she was on Saturday afternoons at 4, and she played the worst movies, mostly on purpose because they were cheap, and you could make fun of bad movies more than make fun of great ones.
Right.
But yeah, that's it. Oh.
So turning into an adult, because your podcast Kill by Kill is all about going through these franchises and these horror movies and Hannibal and stuff, going through it literally kill by kill. So
yeah.
When did that were you able to watch horror movies, and when did that how did that change as an adult?
As like a teenager?
Yeah.
I had a local video store, a mom and pop shop run by a very lovely Vietnamese couple. They would not allow me to. I would go in and try to rent videos, and they just refused. At some point, they hired a kid who looked like he was stoned from the moment he walked in the door.
100% he was.
And I said, please, I've heard all about Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. I have to watch this movie. And he goes, you know what? Normally I would say no to you, but that one I think you'll be fine with. And he rented it to me. And I was like, I'm in. All I want to do is watch this. This is everything I want. So I sought out opportunities to work in video stores as a teenager from that moment on, as a way like, well, I'm on the job. You can't stop me from doing it if I have access to my own supply. And so I eventually found work in video stores and just started cranking through whenever I could. And luckily for me, I was the only person in the house who knew how to operate a VCR.
Oh, there you go.
So, I gained access to Late Night with David Letterman by knowing how to do that. I had gained access to Saturday Night Live and USA Up All Night because I knew how to program a VCR. So those little elements, gained traction for me. And then, as an adult, there were movies that I loved, movies that I didn't. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of went through a fallow period in the 2000s because horror kind of did. Like, I would show up occasionally, but there's a lot of your Saws are not my bag. Nothing against them. It's just not something that I have an emotional connection to them, or I remember how the audience screamed. Those are not memories I have.
Right.
And then really 2010 and that Evil Dead remake.
Oh, so good.
It's so good.
It's so good.
Cabin in the Woods. And it just felt like, and House of the Devil. It just seemed to be like a thing. Like, hey, what could be cool if we made some good horror films? And that it came from a variety of people, and that variety kept multiplying, and there was good horror from overseas to watch as well, because in our fallow period, Japan and Europe and all these places that were still, those movies are still coming our way. Right. There's all this great international stuff, and it's such a wide and expansive variety now that I just said, this is kind of my thing. Like, I got a kid, you can only have so many vices, and I'm just going to narrow it down to like collecting and watching and liking horror movies. And I don't need to be a guy on YouTube with a beard with a wall of DVDs behind me, but this is a thing that I've always liked, and now is my opportunity to just like it a little more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So when you watch movies now, do you get like that kind of childhood fear that brings you back to watching Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, or are you like the rest of us now, kind of like Mary Beth and I, sort of jaded, or how does that feel to you now?
Well, the one thing is I tend not to watch new movies as a critic. I just kind of want to get lost in it. And if something comes, what the revenge is that imagination, that component, elements of that will just get burrowed into my brain. And then at 3:00 in the morning, I will wake up and it's right there.
There you go.
And that's the idea that lingered from that one thing is right there to wake me up. Well over a decade ago, my wife and I were in Hawaii trying to sell a book, and we almost did. And part of it, that after this sort of book conference and trying to get an agent and stuff like that, we went out, took the Road to Hana trip. And my wife, who's a great travel detective, found this yurt that was on the edge of a cliff above a Black Sea beach. It was just the most gorgeous locale. There's no one around you at all. Wow. And you're just out there sleeping and showering and cooking food in what feels like no one is around. And we'd had this great day and had this lovely meal, and we'd hiked and, made love and and we both go to sleep. And about 20 minutes later, I wake up going, wow, I'm really exposed to the elements. Well, you can see a street light up there. Wonder if somebody came walking down that street with a knife in their hand. Oh my God. I didn't sleep a wink. All I did was create the Strangers scenarios of me in this yurt, exposed to the elements on all sides. The only escape is over a cliff. Like, everything that had made it beautiful and wonderful now became a trap.
Wow.
So that's what happens to me.
Wow.
That element of the thing that I see isn't so much in the moment I'm watching it. It just, it pops up below the surface as if it's the raw meat of a dinosaur, and it goes into the ground and it bubbles up crude of fear later.
Wow.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot. That's where a lot of my stuff comes from too. Like, I have OCD, and my OCD, people have heard this in the show before, my OCD manifests as intrusive thoughts. And sometimes that happens with horror movies is like, I'll get certain scenarios in my head and just play them over and over again.
Yeah.
Like I was babysitting my cousins a year ago, and they have a house that has like a bunch of windows to the back porch into the woods. And boy, oh boy, all I could think about was The Strangers or whatever weird thing I could tap on the window with a knife. Like I was just 100% convinced it was going to happen.
Yes, I'm right there with you. That strikes at my home. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite horror movies as an adult? Like, what are some of those movies you've gotten lost in recently?
Well, they come from a variety of places. I will say, as we went close to Halloween, I showed my wife Host on Shudder.
Oh, yeah.
And as much as I had enjoyed that solo, it was more fun with her to have that communal experience. Yes. Certainly that's the one thing that seems to be missing a lot these days. Like the last movie I saw in the theater that wasn't Sonic the Hedgehog. So the second to last movie that I was privileged to see, I have a 10-year-old, was Underwater.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I love Leviathan. That's one of my favorite, 80s faves. Yes, it's a Thing ripoff. Yeah, it doesn't quite work, but super fun makeup, fun. Great characters.
It's underwater.
Love the characters in that movie. And I just loved how they achieved the media res of that story. It just tells you who these people are as it goes. You don't need a ton of backstory. It's just right in there. It was fun. It was nerve wracking. I was sweating and gripping the seats. And I feel that is a scad undersung at this moment because so much has happened that might get lost in the miasma of things this year. But I really enjoyed that one.
It's so good.
I forgot that was this year. Like it's so interesting to think. Like you said, it came out in January, and like everything has happened, and I completely forgot that was a 2020 release.
It really was.
It was such a fun theatrical experience when I saw it.
Yeah,
it's so fun.
It's such a bummer that Fox sat on that for so long, and listen, I don't want to watch movies with T.J. Miller in it either. No. But that's about like the least offensive T.J. Miller has been in a really long time, and they just found a way to just make that simple idea sing, and the distance everyone has, you just feel it, and it was the closest I've been to an experience of The Descent. Which I have a very hard time thinking about The Descent. That movie is a wonderful motion picture. I
just rewatched it recently, and it is such a fucking good movie. Like it is so beautifully done.
Yeah, great characters, simple idea, and it finds a way of what could be, because we've all seen the trapped in a cave thing done so terribly. And in here, they just find a way to transfer the idea of being trapped in such a small space and just draw you into that motion picture. And so that would have been one of those movies that pulled me back in. And another that I think about all the time that was shown to me by a friend was Excision.
Oh my God, Excision.
Excision is just about one of the most little brilliant character piece based horror movies. And another ending I think about all the time. It is just right now I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it.
Shout out to Tony Kaufman, who absolutely loves Excision and talks about it all the time and got me to finally watch that movie. Terry, did you watch it yet?
I haven't, but I will be soon.
Yeah. It is gorgeous. Like, it is slept on. It really is slept on. Like, it is such a good, weird, upsetting in a good way.
Yes.
Movie.
And because, Ricky Bates has a way to ride a line that's really interesting.
Yeah.
There are very few people who can play with that tone. And the only sort of group that I feel like comes close to that are a lot of movies that you get out of South Korea.
Yeah.
Where they're able to ride comedy and drama and the supernatural or just abject horror and weave those things into a package that you wouldn't normally accept, but he just finds a way to do that. And you see it a lot out of South Korea and Japan.
Yeah.
People who are just able to milk those disparate elements into a finely woven motion picture.
It's amazing watching South Korean genre pictures that do that. And because it's a skill that I don't think we necessarily get here.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to watch Excision, and Tony's been poking me for it. So I will be watching it soon. I promise. I really want to see it. So we're going to talk to Gina next week to check up. So don't lie. But how did Kill by Kill come together from your perspective, and what is the podcast about?
I love Friday the 13th movies. They're my warm blanket.
Okay.
And one of the things I love about them are the idea of trying to create a character in such a short period of time, that sort of actor dilemma of, all right, I think I got maybe 5 minutes of screen time. How do I make it so that the audience misses me when I'm gone, or fears that I will die, or goes, oh, no, not him or her. And that is an interesting dilemma from that standpoint. And I love the details in it. They're just so ramshackle. They were produced so quickly. They have little time to do the sort of labyrinthine plotting that you would later see in something like a Saw or the Paramount movies.
Paranormal Activity.
Paranormal Activity.
I just watched that today.
Yeah. Those franchises were able to kind of piece together an elaborate backstory. Friday the 13th doesn't have time for that. It's like we're running and gunning, baby. And so I wanted to talk about these movies, and my wife said, I'm done. And so I had to find somebody to do that with. And I live in LA. I work in the industry. People were a little cynical about podcasts at the time. And they're like, this won't do anything for your career. I'm like, I don't need this for my career. My career does not depend on this. I want to do it because I think it would be fun. Gina, I knew from a different podcast, their Facebook group. It's the Flophouse. It's the granddaddy of all bad movie podcasts, and very funny show. A couple Daily Show writers, their bartender friend. Very simple concept. They watch a bad movie and they talk about it. And they had a nascent Facebook group that at the time I think was like 500 people. Now it's in the tens of thousands. But at the time, like, you knew everybody, you knew everybody in the group. And Gina was the one person who had all the pop culture references I had. And she has the ability, she's just open empathetically to things. Like, people instantly love her. And there's a reason. Like, she's very smart and she's very funny, and she has a way of an acerbic wit that I was like, oh, I recognize that flavor. So I asked her, like, let's give it a shot. Let's talk about Friday the 13th. And at the time, the du jour of podcast was Minute by Minute. And I'm like, ugh, no, thank you. I don't want to talk about Friday the 13th minute by minute. I'd hate the movie and I'd hate the podcast. Not that people don't do it well. I just didn't want to do it. And so I'm like, but if he did it kill by kill, wait. And that was the light bulb. So we tried it out. We tried it by ourselves. We threw a bunch of episodes away and tried it again. And we kind of figured out a rhythm to it. And the technology allowed us to do it because I'm here on the West Coast. She's all the way in New York City. And we've never met in person. We only have this relationship via the internet.
Yeah, that's Terry and I too. We've never met in person either.
Yeah. And I just think it allows us to know we've gotten to know one another via this. And that also invites the audience to get to know us conversely. And I think people deep down, they have a relationship with Friday the 13th, and they like to hear people talk about it. We weren't the first. We won't be the last. Oh my God. But at the time when we started, I think there were like 12 horror podcasts. I counted. I just wanted to make sure someone wasn't doing exactly what we were doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And since then, as a genre, horror has been very, very explored. And the nice thing is that people have mostly found a new way to enter the dialogue about horror. And we're also getting points of view that are well outside of, here's a guy who looks exactly like me and has all my pop culture references and has my white hetero cis thoughts. And we're expanding well beyond that to all these other areas. So I get to hear about all these movies from all these different perspectives. And that has been very, very cool over the last 4 years. And inviting those people on our show, that's been a real joy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cause it's amazing to me. Gosh, I cannot speak today. It is amazing to me that you started this back in 2016 and you tore through all the Fridays. You've torn through all the nightmares. It's crazy that you've kept it going for so long. I think that's awesome. And you are now, you're doing Scream and you're alternating with Hannibal. Is that what you're doing right now?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of hit season 3. We finally got to Freddy versus Jason. We exorcised that demon. And so we're like, what are we going to do next? And we kind of toyed around like maybe Halloween, like everyone. We were asked many, many times Halloween. And I'm like, let's just do whatever we want to do for a little bit and then we'll get to it. And then as we kind of went, the pandemic happened and we were in lockdown and all of a sudden we had more time to talk to one another. And we're like, what do we do that we could do together that would, because we're an every other week podcast, because that's about all I can do. What can we do that would be like, short and fun and would be a fun activity for us that we would always look forward to? Watching an episode of Hannibal is one of the best activities for that.
Hell yeah, it is.
So we picked that up and we went with it. And then I wanted to watch Scream. I wanted to watch Scream and I was a little afraid because most of what we cover on the movie are fun trash. Yeah. Like I enjoy watching these movies, but outside of something like A Nightmare on Elm Street, we're not hitting on real classics. Right. And I feared talking about Carpenter's Halloween because what is there left to say, given that everyone else has had a shot at it and people far smarter than me have covered it. So I don't know that that's my bag. And then I'm like, you know what? I want to watch Scream. Let's watch Scream and see what happens. And it turns out everyone was very into it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. Everyone loves Scream.
People love Scream.
Yeah. And, we'd been stuck a little bit in the 80s, which is understandable given my age. But we also talked about Mikey this year. And that was another only 90s kids will understand sort of sitch. And that one went through the roof as well. So it's kind of like, let's explore a different decade. Let's mix this up a little bit. So we don't try to do things back to back to back to back. And obviously I don't think we can cover Scream the same way we covered Friday the 13th. There's just not that volume of death.
Right.
But, it is interesting to watch a true craftsman at work, and Craven is so good at that point. And he's working with someone else who's worked out how people talk and the plot. And he's just free to make it sing. And it just, man, that is a damn good movie. It only gets better with age. I was a little afraid, but it's good.
It is good. It's good. I will hazard to say that the sequel is better for me, but it is a good movie.
You know what? Terry, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I will say personally, I'm very much looking forward to covering 2 because I think the suspense sequences in 2 are peerless.
Yeah.
I think there are sequences within that. The Sarah Michelle Gellar sequence.
Oh, that's so good.
The cop car sequence.
My favorite.
The room that has
the sound booth,
that one classroom that has the soundproof wall.
Yeah.
Those are really good suspense gags. And they work. And it's a miracle because they had to redo the movie because the script leaked.
Yeah.
That movie is a miracle. Just a miracle.
It really is.
So I really, when you're in an aliens situation there, where you can't fault people for liking one over the other.
That's a good
but
comparison.
People also don't go, but Alien is trash. No one
Right.
goes like, I love Scream 2, but Scream doesn't do anything for me, kid. Like, I don't think that truly exists unless people are like devil's advocating it up.
Right.
But it will, and then we get to 3 and it's a whole different ball game, kids.
So, Patrick, we've talked about your horror history and some of your creative endeavors, but what movie are we discussing today?
We're going to talk about the movie that made me look out the window and wonder, am I going to die tonight? And it's called Friday the 13th, Part 2.
So, in the second entry of the long-running horror series, it focuses on a group of teenage would-be counselors converging on Camp Crystal Lake for training. Inevitably, they learn the story of Jason Voorhees, a boy who ostensibly drowned at the camp and whose mother murdered a group of counselors in revenge. No one takes the tale seriously until a very much alive Jason begins gruesomely eliminating people. So, tell us your horror story about this movie. How old were you? Like, what scene scared you? What was happening around you? Paint us a picture.
So, as I had previously mentioned, my family typically took a single vacation every year to Balboa Island and rented a house. One particular year, and this must have been 82. I have to imagine. I don't know exactly where it was in that realm, but it had to have been 82, 83. We decided that, I was involved in the decision. My parents decided they would rent a cabin for a week with another family, local family, and that we would all go up there and stay in this cabin, for the summer. Or not for the summer, for like 2 weeks, as opposed to Balboa Island, which was very controversial. And in this rented cabin, there was a small bookshelf of what looked like illegally dubbed tapes.
Oh, yeah. I know
either
those.
from VHS to VHS or taped off of an HBO. Who's to say?
Right.
But one of those tapes said Friday the 13th, 1, 2. And that became, I would go every day to just look at this handwritten videotape. Like, I'm going to watch that. I got to find a way to watch that. And I'm going to watch it. So at one point, during this 2 weeks, the parents decided, I'm sick of staying around all these children. You all watch yourselves. We're going to go out for dinner and we're going to go bowling.
Oh, perfect.
And they figure, like, what is the worst that will happen? The worst that would happen was that a young Patrick would go, this is my opportunity.
Yep.
I'm going to watch that movie. I put it in. It started with, like, me, my next younger brother, and the oldest daughter from the other family. And as soon as it went through the opening recounting, and as we played it, I assumed this to be Friday the 13th. It turned out that they had recorded part 2 first.
Oh.
And I didn't know. I didn't have a clue. It's just, it starts telling a story. And I'm like, have I missed some things? By the end of Alice's remembrance of the first film, everyone else had drifted out of the room. Like, they're just, I'm done. I don't care about this. I saw someone's head fly off. I'm out. and I watched Friday the 13th Part 2. Other kids would drift in and out of the room, and in my head, I thought, this is the perfect crime. Because my parents are not here, how will they ever hear that I have watched this movie? It was very quickly told to them when they returned, and I was grounded for quite a while. But on top of that, I also got to look out every day and night out to this very wooded community in Lake Arrowhead, and I freaked myself out. Everywhere I looked, I saw a bag-headed Jason peering out from behind a very tall pine. Yes, Lake Arrowhead has a lake. Everything about it, outside of it, how much more brown it is than New Jersey. Basically, this was the worst idea of all time. And
it sounds like the best idea to me.
And so it was just, it seared into my brain. Like, it is primarily, like, it's the one I have the most fondness for.
Yeah.
Although I would say that final chapter is sort of the platonic ideal of Fridays, because it's everything you want in a Friday the 13th movie. And Part 2 is still finding its feet. But it's got a lot going for it. It's got great characters. The director loves butts, so you see plenty of those.
He definitely does.
He really loves butts, and he can't believe they exist, and he just has to photograph them to make sure they're real.
And make sure they're in the shortest of shorts.
Yeah. And this movie it really does hit that sweet spot of 70s turning into 80s, because it was filmed in 80.
Yeah.
So it's just right on the cusp.
Yeah.
And so it lived on in my mind from then on.
So what do you remember what scenes in particular that like would linger in your mind after watching it? Because like there's I don't know how old you were at that time, but like there's some evocative scenes in this of like,
yes.
I mean, it's cut from what was originally in there, but like still some of those scenes and sequences are very, I can imagine them lingering.
Yeah. Alice's death at the beginning.
Yeah.
When she opens the refrigerator door and sees Pamela's head rotting inside. And then she gets an ice pick through the temple.
Yeah.
Really, really got to me. Like, Jason looks like he's lived in the forest. It's the only Jason that looks like his natural environment has taken a toll on him. Mm-hmm. And so I was very afraid of, like I said earlier, the prairie, the great outdoors, the lack of modern convenience, all of that just scared the living hell out of me. But I think the thing that third act, I think, is probably the best third act in any Friday the 13th movie. It just moves and it creates a sense of danger. The night is very black. It's opaque. You cannot see, like some of them, like Part 6. There might as well be a UFO landing in the background. It's just so bright.
It is so bright.
It's not to say it isn't well photographed. It is. But this still has that grimy edge of being an under-budgeted cheapie.
Yeah.
And so the night is, you don't know what's happening out there. You only have one light source. A twig snaps. Is that a raccoon? Is it that stupid dog Muffin that Jason looks at from a camera point of view of his penis? We don't know.
I texted Terry and I was like, this is a top tier ending where it ends with Muffin. I mean, I know that's not the full ending, but like Muffin at the door. I was like, this is top tier. This is amazing. This is everything I want in a movie. It's just so ridiculous. And everyone's like, Muffin.
How could anything bad happen now? We found Muffin. Oh, just you wait.
It just made me laugh. I was like, you know what? I love it. It's perfect.
The music becomes like that kind of saccharine, like over the top melodramatic, like, oh, it's such a happy ending. And yeah, it's a good, like, I mean, it's a good, answer to the first one, where it's like also, you know, it's all happy and she's in the lake and stroking the water, and then of course the jump scare. So I think it's a good like retelling of that kind of ending.
It is. And, you know, Paul is such a, you know, himbo. He's so useless. And Ginny is pretty smart. Like I know people make a lot of play like, oh, she's a smart final girl and everything. It's more like she is actually more aware of her situation. Yeah. She just it takes the information as it comes to her and figures, how can I make my way out of this? And it's not some sort of grand pronouncement of what a final girl is. And I will only say this here, and I don't mean this as any sort of correction in any way, shape, or form. It's just a general misconception of the franchise. These movies do not feature teenagers. These kids are college age and older. They're not meant to be playing teenagers. Teenagers primarily don't have these jobs. They're college age and older. They're buying their own video games. And so that is meant to differentiate it from Halloween, which was a teenage horror film. And later, Nightmare on Elm Street was like, we're going to have teenagers. So Friday the 13th really is a slightly older affair. Like these kids should not be, they're not like alone in the woods. They can rent cars. You know what I mean? Right. They can rent cabins. And we've all been fed this very simple line of like, what's a Friday the 13th movie? Teenagers go to the woods, have sex, do drugs, die. And it's like, that's not actually what happens. You can be like Ginny and have sex with a really hot dude who doesn't have anything going on upstairs, but you know, what's in his pants works apparently. Right. She can drink just fine and she lives. People who abstain from all of those things die. That is a misnomer. It is something that people who misread Men, Women, and Chainsaws sort of regurgitate, or they hear Randy in Scream and go, oh, I know what this is. I mean, I can understand that misconception because we've all heard it. But when you're watching the movies the way we did and taking notes about every single movement and weird pant choice they make, you begin to notice that this is not really that what these movies are. It's an oversimplification of them in order to make them seem dumb and small. They're dumb and small in their own ways, but not in that way.
I mean, it's true. And going back to Ginny, the thing that I really liked this time was I did pick up her. She has a humanity about her. I loved the conversation at the bar that she has with her himbo boyfriend, where she's talking about, she's trying to, you mentioned kind of she's taking in information and then she's like reasons through it. Well, and she's doing that in this little bit of monologue where she's talking about how it's giving a nice little exposition dump of like, this is what we're to expect from Jason, but it's also kind of setting him up as almost a sympathetic victim to the whole thing, because he's talking about how, you know, oh, he might not have understood death until this point, and then he sees his mother dying, and then there's that rage, and then, you know, she says it's bizarre. I mean, he must be out there right now crying for her return, her resurrection, and it's a bit of a little bit of story exposition, but it's also a way of both humanizing her as a final girl and Jason as the villain.
Yeah. 100%. Well, and so I wanted to go back to something you were saying, Patrick, about Men, Women, and Chainsaws and how the final girl is defined in that text and how a lot of people compare final girls to Carol Clover's own discussion of the final girl. Yeah. And I think in watching a lot of slashers recently, like Black Christmas and Friday the 13th, I think there's something to the final girl that is missed a lot of the time in terms of discussing trauma and centering it. It's so often centered on the woman or like young female character's virginity, her sexuality, and like her personality, but it's not centered on her experience so much. And I think there should be more discussion about the final girl as a personification of trauma and dealing with trauma and what it means to be traumatized. And I think that can apply here, Friday the 13th, because like obviously Ginny is a woman who does adult things, but she goes through this traumatic experience. And I think it should be more grounded in that kind of discussion of why we like to watch women experiencing trauma and what that means for horror and what that means for depictions of trauma and PTSD. Because Terry said something in our notes that was really fascinating about the beginning of the film seeming like a story about PTSD and how she is so scared the whole time. I mean, it's also with a recap that takes 6 minutes and that's like kind of hilarious.
Previously on Friday the 13th.
But it is a really interesting look at that PTSD, and that's something I would love more of in horror, is kind of looking at that effects of those things and not just killing her in like the first 10 minutes. But that's just my tangent, because I love the final girl and I think it's so much more complex than a lot of people. I think the term is much more complex than people give it credit for. So yeah.
Well, I mean, but the converse element of that is like there is a ton of conservative misogyny baked into the cake of a slasher that it is worthy of discussion and it is worthy of examination. And you compare this part 2 that came out the same year. Well, I guess Halloween 2 comes out the year after. Halloween 2 feels infinitely more misogynistic. All the guys die just off screen or through an opaque piece of glass. They slip and they fall, but they're kind of like, they're not. It's just like something happened to Bud. What are you going to do? But this half naked lady, she has to boil alive with her face. And they're like, hey, there you go. Like, I completely get the conservative, you turn me on, you have to die element of slashers, but they also don't apply to every film in the canon. And it's, while there's a ton of male gaze happening in Friday the 13th movies, I believe the depictions of those characters, and one of the reasons why we wanted to do the show was to talk about characters in a more complex, nuanced, and broken down way, rather than skimming over them as many people do, just to talk about, you know, a kid who gets a hatchet to the face. And that's great. I love it. Living and dying by that kill. It's fantastic. But there's so much more to this movie than just that element of it. And you're absolutely right. I want a more nuanced look at why we as a society want to watch particularly women outlive the murderous intent of men. And what do we gain from it? And what do we lose from it? Because I believe there are two sides to that coin.
Yeah.
You know, Ginny often sort of gets painted with this, she's smart, so she lives brush, and smart is certainly part of her. And she's certainly very determined. She's not one of those Friday the 13th characters who looks at death in the face and says, I've had a good life. For some reason, the series is full of those people. She's not one of them. But conversely, like, there's a lot of independence to various final girls over the genre. And what are we looking at this in what I would love to think is the most hopeful way, which is, I believe that a society that is so patriarchal, that legislates women's bodies, that for many years denied them the ability to have a say in our society by vote or by business ownership, Conversely, we have entire groups of people in our Latinx and Black communities and Asian communities, who are, and not to say anything about our indigenous populations, who are denied things almost actively to this day by a system meant to erase that from them. They have always leaned into horror as a worthy entertainment. And I believe that deep down there is a hope of survival is what brings people to horror over and over again. I hope.
I mean, that's what brings me to horror. It's processing sort of kind of a cultural or a societal kind of trauma through watching someone overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. So I do think that is an intent that a lot of horror fans go into it. I do think that there is, I mean, there's obviously people that get off on the combination of TNA and violence in these types of movies. It's just one of those things where it's like a dual-edged sword, where there's always the intent behind it, and then there's always the audience, what they get out of it. And it sometimes audiences can reclaim that narrative, but then other audiences can also ruin it. I think of I mean, this isn't horror or slasher, but I think of the intent behind like Fight Club, and then the way that it has been, viewed outside of the author's intent and the creator's intent, and used as sort of like a celebration of that macho culture, everyone focuses on the actual Fight Club and don't realize that it's actually a condemnation of that sort of like anarchy and nihilism that a certain type of youthful 20-something man might feel towards society. Yeah. So like it's definitely like a convoluted, and I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it. It's definitely a more nuanced topic than some people give it credit for, I think.
I mean, every genre has its element of fandom that is surface level, and so that's always a component you have to get past. And then on top of that, there's also this element of horror movies are meant to break down societal norms. Like, they violate things. It's an inherent violation. We have a home. This is supposed to be where we feel safe. Well, now a ghost lives there and he wants you out.
Right.
I don't know why I made the ghost to him, but I've decided to. And so when a movie's supposed to disquiet you and it's supposed to feel like a violation of your safety bubble, part of that is dipping into things that might make you uncomfortable, like forcing you to watch a woman undress when you're in public. Oh, wait a second. Now I'm seeing this guy's butt. Do I like this? Do I not like this? What's happening to me? And it's meant to unmoor you slightly so that you are more prepared to be shocked by the violence element of it. And that, while it makes sense in a sort of psychological way or in a storytelling sense, it also brings about some very troubling questions about why we like horror movies.
Yeah.
Like, why do I enjoy all of these different elements, and how can I properly enjoy the things I do like about Friday the 13th Part 2 and sort of give up the idea of this is about looking at this woman's body as she goes skinny dipping,
with the Jaws music
inherently
playing.
There's nothing fucking wrong with skinny dipping. There should be more guys skinny dipping in this. There should be a lot more wang. There's a lot of things that should be more in these movies that are just unfortunately come across as very a product of a patriarchal entertainment system, as Paramount was in 1981.
Yeah. It's interesting talking to you about this, because I know that you're a big fan of the Friday the 13th movies. And when I grew up, I didn't really have them in my house. It was the one horror franchise that was definitely verboten in my house, because it was it was kind of that, again, the sort of like all these young nubile women in the woods getting hacked to pieces. So like it wasn't allowed in my house. And I've talked about my babysitter, Dottie on the show before, or Dodie, my bad, Dodie on the show before, but she was my babysitter. She was an old woman, and she had a granddaughter that introduced me to one of the Friday the 13th. And I remember sitting there and having my hands over my eyes during any of the naughty parts, because that was sort of like the agreement for me watching rated R movies when I was a kid, was no nudity. So like anytime there was a boob or something like that on screen, I had to have my hands over my eyes and not look. And I have this memory. I think it might have been part 2, but I don't really remember which of the early Fridays it was. But I just remember sitting there watching it with this probably college age girl, and I had my hands over my eyes, and she's like, "Don't do that." But like that was like my only like. She's like, she said something about like, you don't have to do that here. And I'm like, but I'm told this is how I'm supposed to watch these movies. But it was like this, that was like my introduction to Friday the 13th. So like it's not my favorite of the franchises, to be honest. I've always been a Fred head. And because partly that was because those are the ones that I was allowed to watch as a kid. For some reason, those were okay when the Friday
They're more
13th.
fantastical.
They are.
There might as well be a unicorn walking around in them. Like, it makes sense.
Right. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on that, because watching, because I had to watch the first 6, rewatch the first 6 for guesting on Halloweenies, because I was going to talk about the 6th one. And I don't know. There's something about these movies that just does not work for me too much, except I will say that this time rewatching number 2, I could appreciate it more as sort of like an urban legend type story. I like the way that Jason is presented in this one, because at this point, no one knows that Jason is a thing. And so in our minds, it is just, we just have this image going into this movie of sort of like the child from the end of Friday the 13th 1 pulling, Alice into the water. And so like, I really actually grew to love this one a little bit more from that regard. But I'm curious about you, Mary Beth, because you also had never seen Friday the 13th movies, correct?
Correct. So yeah, I actually watched the first and second one today in prep for the podcast. I know that I didn't need to see the first one for this, but I felt like it would make sense if I watched the first one before watching part 2. It's not my favorite franchise, but I liked the second one a lot.
Sure,
like Terry said, I really liked the kind of urban legend angle. It felt much more scary to me. And the first one, I hadn't seen it, but I saw the end. It was on TV and my dad had it on, and I saw the ending. So unfortunately, that was spoiled for me. And everyone on the internet talks about the ending. Like, it's not easy to stay away from. This will be a good question for the both of you. I don't like where... The hockey mask. Like, everyone fucking talks about the hockey mask. I haven't seen a goddamn hockey mask yet. And so I'm just like, I don't understand, because it's like Michael Myers, you see him in Halloween and he has the mask and like he has that aesthetic and you know it. Freddy Krueger has his hat and his knife hands and his sweater and his scarred face and you know it. And then Jason is like, I don't fucking know. And I'm just so curious how like this all came to be, and like that identity became his when in the first 2 movies that has nothing to do with it.
I mean, that's one of the wild elements of this. Like in the first movie, Jason is this story. He's the inciting incident. He kind of creates the death curse, as it were, of Crystal Lake. And that inciting incident, which also, just briefly, I was on a phone call the other night, a Zoom call with a lot of various horror people, and someone brought up that one of the elements of Friday the 13th that is never talked about
Mary Beth wanted
is
to talk
the
about
sort
that.
of ableism around Jason in and of itself. I mean, this is not for me to talk about, but oh my God, there's such a well that I'm rather ashamed we didn't quite touch on ever. But then again, we're a bit of a comedy podcast. Like, we're mixing in facts along the way. We're mixing in cultural commentary.
Yeah, and so actually that's okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I really wanted to discuss about the film. And just as a disclaimer, everybody, I am not I'm not super well read on disability activism. So please, if I get anything wrong, like, please tweet at us or email us, and I'll be sure to correct in the next episode. But so something that I really was kind of focusing on was there's Mark, who is the character in a wheelchair, which is, I mean, great representation. He's in a wheelchair. He's a camp counselor. He still gets a girl. Like, you know, he talks about his an accident and that he will not always be paralyzed. And then you have Jason, who you see at the last minute and who obviously has some kind of birth defects on his face and potentially mental disabilities, but we don't really know. I mean, Jenny talks about him in a way of having mental disabilities, but that's never confirmed. But obviously you can tell that there are birth defects on his face. And there's this really interesting tension about the temporarily / good disabled versus the permanently / bad disabled I saw in this movie. Because Mark is in a wheelchair and he said it's temporary and like it's the good way of being paralyzed or not paralyzed.
Yeah.
And he's handsome.
He's very handsome.
He's very handsome. And he is only physically affected. It is not affecting his brain or his looks. It's just like, oh, it's so tragic, but he still perseveres. And then there's Jason.
Well, they even ask, like, she asks, you know, does it work down there, basically, like, right? He's like, oh, I've not had any complaints, is basically kind of the joke about it, right? So
exactly. Like, he can still have sex. He can still be like a normal young adult. Like, he can still party. He can do everything. And then there's Jason, who's the bad disabled, who most likely was born with some kind of disability, and he's permanently physically affected in a way that makes him what society would consider ugly. And so it is just like a fascinating, interesting tension and representations here of like what we think disability is in terms of being good versus bad, and how mental disabilities seem to be like the evil thing and physical disabilities are good. And it's just a very interesting thing to parse out and to think about and how we think about disability in horror film. Because it's
and I doubt the filmmakers or anyone involved in this production gave this an iota.
No, probably not.
And they probably didn't, but like that's what's kind of disappointing sometimes in these movies is they don't think about it, and it's so ingrained in societal expectations that like, oh yeah, like the evil guy is going to be kind of like, might have some kind of mental disability. He's going to be ugly. And I think that's just like really goes into the ableism that's steeped within horror films and horror and representations of disability in horror film, because monsters usually have physical disability. And I don't want to like, I also want to like emphasize that having a character in a wheelchair as a positive, handsome character is awesome. Like that is a really surprising and great character choice, because again, like most of the time people in wheelchairs are like used as a joke, or it's an old person. It's not a handsome boy. I think about
Franklin, right? I think about Franklin.
Oh from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah.
Yes. Who's basically the most annoying person on wheels. And that is his role. And, he's meant to be a problem.
Yeah.
And that is the core of that character. And whereas, here it's all very different. And I really would love some people who are within that community to examine this. I would listen to the hell out of it, because I think that's a whole element here that we're not getting, and I would love to talk about it, but I'm not equipped.
Same.
So please, if you are in this community and you love horror films, like, I want to hear from you. You have something to say. And that's the cool thing right now, is that everyone has equal opportunity to voice how they feel about these movies, and the audience is waiting for it.
One thing that watching these movies that jumped out at me, is there's a lot of gay men in these movies, actors. Like I know that the sixth one is like, you know, the Friday the 13th, right? And where it's because like half the cast is pretty much queer. But like the guy that plays Mark, for instance, was a gay man that unfortunately passed away in the 90s from AIDS. And then Russell Todd, the guy that played Scott, I'm pretty sure he is queer, but man, is he grown up to be a silver fox daddy.
Oh man, he's so damn good looking. Listen, this movie is not hard on the eyes. No. Like there's a lot of hot dudes strewn throughout this franchise, and that is part of it. They're particularly the first two movies, they're pulling from the New York theater community. So that's where I think we're getting a lot of representation there. And you're seeing like the hottest people within the age group that hadn't been seen a lot in movies. And so that's why you're getting your Kevin Bacons, you know, strewn in there. And he's, you know, he's very easy on the eyes. We get to see his ass. It's great. It's fantastic. And all of that element is kind of woven into the franchise. Like, yes, it's base. Yes, it's simple. Yeah, as they go on, they get dumber. But that's true of almost everything. And, I also feel like it's so simple that I think younger audiences look at it and go, why would I be scared of any of this? And that I kind of get.
No, absolutely.
I do.
You know, so I even though I'm not a huge fan of this franchise, I did order the Scream Factory collection. And
good man.
I don't know if you've seen the gore cuts. I was misunderstood. I thought that they were like added back in, but watching them, I can realize why they weren't, because they're really terrible VHS quality and without sound.
Yeah. There's no sound.
But let me tell you, have you seen it, Patrick?
Yes,
I have. It was a weird
yeah.
experience watching those. I sat down to watch the gore scenes, and it's quiet. And it felt like at one point I was watching something that I shouldn't be watching because the quality is so terrible. And
it looks like a snuff film.
It looks like a snuff film. Like the first death, Mary Beth, is with Alice. Like her head turns and you can see like the screwdriver's gone through her nose. So like there's a little bit of that, but like the other ones, like in particular, like Scott's death where he's hanging upside down and he gets his throat slashed, goes on for a while as the blood is like pouring out. Like, and watching it without any sound whatsoever was like, it made my skin kind of crawl, honestly.
Ew, that does sound like something you'd see on like Rotten.com and like the past or something like that, like something awful.
Like I could honestly see someone take that in particular, that sequence and like, you know, trash it up a little bit more with like make it look even worse, and people might mistake it as a snuff film, because it is without the sound. It reminds me of like something that you would watch in like the Sinister, like one of the Sinister tapes, right? Because it's just quiet and
interesting,
gory.
There's a verisimilitude to it because there's not the theatricality of the widescreen and the over dramatic music to it.
And it's just like scene after scene after scene. So it's like you're sitting there for like 5 minutes watching a throat get slashed, a face get stabbed, poor Mark getting thrown down the stairs. Like,
oh God,
it's like, it was surprising.
Yeah. Of course, the only thing missing from that I wish was there, but apparently is lost for time immemorial, is the end shot is this slow push in to Pamela Voorhees' head, which you can tell looks very different than the head you saw in the refrigerator. Right. And it almost looks like a person with makeup. It is a person with makeup. And the end gag was her supposedly
winking, right?
Opening her eyes. And that's the only thing that we still don't have from this movie, which is a real bummer because there's a lot of work that went into that just lost to the ages.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So do we want to wrap up and give our final thoughts on the film?
Sounds good.
Cool. So Terry, how many horny teens out of 5 do you give Friday the 13th Part 2?
I give it, this time watching it, I think I actually do give it 4. horny teens or horny college students.
Yes, pardon me, horny college students.
Out of 5.
They're in their 20s. They're young adults, whatever the hell that is. Yeah.
But because, I really was drawn into it this time, not as a tale of what Jason would become, but as this urban legend of someone in the forest that is there hunting people that has never left. And it kind of worked for me this time. And I started to see some scenes that were homage later on in life. Like I was immediately, the opening scene immediately brought me to mind of the opening to Hostel 2, where it's that one, it's like Paxton is dealing with traumatic stress, and his girlfriend doesn't believe him, and then not his head, his headless body is found by her. But it's sort of like an inverse of this of the beginning of this film. So I could see how this movie both took from movies that came before, because there's obviously the kill in this, the spear stab is also kind of taken pretty much note for note from Bay of Blood. Yeah. And I do think that the iconic moment where Jason sits up in bed and he has the hood on and you just see his one eye is such an evocative moment, because that's the first time that we actually get to see him. Yeah. And it's a moment that still I think works really well as kind of like a reveal, and us gays, we love our reveals. So I think this time I actually do give it 4, whereas before I might not have been as generous. What about you, Mary Beth?
So I'm gonna give it a 3 horny college students / young adults out of 5. I think. So one of the things that I was really focused on in watching this was I've been going down a Giallo hole for the first time in my life. And so I've been comparing everything to Giallo and being very, very fascinated with how slashers borrow from Giallo. And I couldn't stop thinking about it with this film in a good way. And I did really enjoy this more than the first one. And the urban, like Terry keeps saying, the urban legend aspect was terrifying and a really good way to get it, to build up that scare. I just don't know if Friday the 13th is the franchise for me. That being said, I will watch all of them. So we'll see. Patrick, you have the final say. How many horny young adults out of 5 do you give Friday the 13th Part 2?
Yeah, this is a 4 to a 4.5. This is pretty good. And there's a lot, the Giallo element of it, the killer POV, which it loses after this movie, the mystery element. Yeah. When audiences went into movie theaters, they didn't know who Jason was. There was no hockey mask yet. All of the things that are pop culturally known about Jason aren't really collected in this movie. That killer could be anyone. And I'm really going to blow some people's minds here. There is an open debate as to whether or not the person we call Jason is actually that kid from that lake.
That makes sense, though. I couldn't stop thinking about that either. I was like, is this the same Jason? Is this the same boy, or could it be someone different? I actually actively was thinking about that, so that's interesting that you bring that up.
I mean, listen, as the movies go on, they double down on legitimizing it, but it's inherently impossible, right? And up until the point, he becomes a zombie and never dies, then, okay, that's fine. But inherently, this comes down to a singular trauma in which a single woman lost her child, and it breaks her. And she, at that point, a disabled child whom she could not leave anywhere else. And she had to continue to work. Yeah. And that child dies tragically when no one is watching. And ultimately, if that is in fact true, then what happens from part 2 on is some sort of ghost revenant or death curse, as Crazy Ralph with his beautiful bike posture puts it. And so the more you invest in it, the deeper the tragedy. It's got the cheap thrills. It's got the fun makeup. It has all the party film aspects of it still. But the more you examine the components of it, there is a sad undertone to it. That I think is worthy of conversation, and it should be allowed in the same way we talk about the deeper elements of Nightmare on Elm Street or the deeper elements of the Halloween, at least the original. Where it goes from there, that's your mileage may vary. Child's Play, how it is allowed to evolve. So for me, this is a great one. And it's fun. I like the POV elements of it. It is super goofy. At one point, a character opens up a door and there's a toilet.
It's amazing.
With this giant music stab.
Yeah.
And it's just like a toilet, which then like that means that Jason has a toilet and that he's been actively using, and the plumbing's still working. There's a lot of questions that I have about this motion picture, but I could talk about it forever. Yeah. And honestly, I have been.
That's true.
I've been talking about it forever. And thank you for letting me do it.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us to talk about Friday the 13th Part 2. Where can the listeners find you, and what do you have coming up?
Well, Kill by Kill is available anywhere podcasts are. If you find one that doesn't give it to you, let me know and I'll try to fix it. But we're pretty much out there everywhere. We're on Twitter at Kill by Kill Pod. We've got a Facebook group where we talk about things a bit more detail. We're on Instagram. We're on Letterboxd. We have a Patreon that will give you additional weird content that we do every month. And we're coming up here at the later part of the year. Things are a little weird. We're talking a couple weird Thanksgiving elements that we're doing. We're talking about Blood Rage finally.
I love Blood Rage.
I don't know if you're aware of this, Terry, but it's not cranberry sauce. A line that is repeated far too often for a good line to work.
I love it.
We're also doing Saw's Giving, where we asked our audience, because we've never seen any Saw movie past the first one, which would be the most confusing sequel to watch without having any knowledge about it. Our audience has chosen, and you'll find out about it the Friday after Thanksgiving. We're talking about Hannibal. And we're going to finish up the first season by the end of the year, and then in the new year, we're gonna be back at Scream 2 at some point.
Sweet.
So lots to look forward to.
Awesome. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What is your experience with Friday the 13th Part 2? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out directly to us on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gailey Dreadful.
And of course, make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcast everywhere. Acast.com.